Okay, I think I'm on. Okay, can everyone hear me? And if you want to respond or ask questions, just hit the chat and I'll be there. I'm trying to get my stuff somewhat situated. Okay, so, and here's two more pictures of Pathfinders, and you notice them putting on their kind of fake makeup and camouflage. And yes, that's where the term Geronimo comes from, is when they jumped out of an airplane. The Pathfinders especially were taught guerrilla tactics, and a lot of these came from, this goes all the way back to George Rogers Clark during the French and Indian War. And they said they were using Indian tactics, basically from the bad Western movies of that time. And 5 good ones. But that's where they wanted to act like they were American Indians, and they would say Geronimo, and you notice their hair, they cut it so they would think they look like American Indians, and it was American paratroopers, where people today, when they say the term, they're wearing a mohawk, that's the mohawk. That's where it comes from. And so, a couple more jumping on the plane. That is a Bangalore torpedo, which they used in the movie. They would put under obstacles and barbed wire and things like that to blow it up, and it was a long tube so that they would carry it in. And this is how another unit of the 82nd Airborne, how scattered they were. And that last one was 101st. This shows how widely scattered the 81st Airborne was, and some were as far as 20 miles away from the drop zone behind Utah Beach. That's the 82nd Airborne's patch, All-American AA. And I just like that picture because it's calling gliders, and those are, they're called Wacos, and they carry about a dozen men. And you can see the stripes, I mentioned those before, to show that they were Allied planes. And by the time the U.S. got air superiority, the U.S., the British, the Canadians, and then soon the French, more and more French forces would be used, over 1 million by the end of the war. They all would use that because there was such a low threat of German airplanes, because they didn't have enough fuel to train their pilots, let alone fly the planes. Those are wrecked British gliders. That's an American crew. When the gliders hit and they would roll, these are just wooden and really cheaply made. So if they hit and rolled, that would be just deadly for the people inside of those gliders. And they also put, in any place with a big field like that, the Germans would place huge all steel poles or iron poles about 15 feet up. Just stick poles up out of their feet, 15 feet up, maybe a foot wide, with the idea being that any glider would come in use those fields. They knew the Germans used gliders. The Germans used them first in 1940. They would hit those poles, tear apart the gliders, and they were called Rommel's asparagus. And that's St. Marie English, and that's where the 82nd Airborne, or the 101st Airborne, that's one John Wayne would take in the movie. And that's the church where they took, and they have this scene from the movie where there's a man hanging from there. His parachute caught on that, and that's true. And these are American paratroopers in St. Marie English when they finally did take the church. And that's the way it looks. Okay, that was taken about 2001, but still, it's still there. They have a fake paratrooper there on the church. So all the time now on the church, you go look, and there's a parachutist up there. That's what it's like today. And inside the church, almost all the stained glass that they didn't remove, they took a lot of stained glass out because they knew there'd be shelling, but stuff they didn't remove was broke. And inside the church now, they have this as 2 U.S. parachutists landing in the stained glass next to, that's Mary and Jesus. And while that's going on, there are the troops getting prepared to land. And just a couple things I want to say about the beach. I'm not going to go to all the beaches, just a few things I thought the movie did not hit very well. Here are American forces getting on what's called the Higgins Boat. And those flat-bottom Higgins Boat would be a great American innovation because they were used in the bayous of Louisiana. And they could skim over the very shallow water of the bayous of Louisiana, and with a few adjustments were perfect for carrying troops. And they were cheaply made, inexpensively made. They could make a lot of them, and that's why the U.S. D-Day and now the U.S. World War II Museum is in New Orleans, because that's where these boats were made. And these are called landing ship infantry, LSIs, smaller flat-bottom ships that can land on the beach. And those are barrage balloons. And you see a lot of pictures of the barrage balloons. It's kind of a famous thing. But the idea was, if enemy fighters come, they wouldn't want to get too low because they would run into the thick, heavy wires that's holding those balloons up over the ship. And so that was to deter low-level strafing. Dive bombers or low-flying enemy fighter planes using their machine guns or cannon to strafe the ships, they could be a lot more accurate the lower they get. They had limited effect, but boy, they used a lot of them. And that's another American LCI filled. That's a Higgins boat, flat bottom, and that's training jumping out. Trust me, it's not that easy. LSTs were amazing things, and the thing about LSTs, I do have to mention my other grandpa on my dad's side. This was a big deal. They didn't have any money when my dad was a little kid, but he got money. He got a job, and money, I assume, from the job. They made LSTs in Omaha, Nebraska, and they lived outside of Omaha. And so that allowed them to move off the sharecropper's farm, which they would soon lose, and they moved to a little town called Louisville, Nebraska. But he and Omaha made these, and then they would go down the Missouri, then down the Mississippi, and they would use, because they were flat bottoms and they weren't that wide, so they could be used on the river. And so he made these, and he was a welder, and then that got him a good job when they used to have a steel mill in Omaha. And so when I was a little kid, that was his job, was as a welder from making LSTs. They could hold about 6 tanks, a few hundred troops, all packed on board. Awful. These things were flat bottoms, so every wave it would just go up and down, and they would be all seasick. And that's just one more vehicle I want to show you. That's a duck. And the duck was basically a 2.5 ton truck that they put a propeller on the back and made it like a boat frame so it could go over the water or drive like a truck. And it wasn't that easy to drive like a truck. Every time you got out, you had to put a bunch of grease on it. It wasn't like seamless. But ducks were one of the war winners. Eisenhower would say after the war that there are few weapons more important than the duck, because they could get supplies up to the beach and or get across water. Such a useful vehicle with a great design. And if you go to places, a lot of places they'll have, I just remember vividly in Boston, to this day they still have duck tours, where they have old World War II era ducks, and they take tours of Boston Harbor. Problem is they're pretty dangerous. You can see how low they run in the water, and a few have sunk. I would not do that. And just a couple of, these are the British beaches. Gold and Sword were British. Juno in the middle was Canadian. Remember I told you how the Germans tried to heavily defend the center of the beaches most. That's why Juno was the heaviest defense, even though this whole area is really flat. So if you get past Caen, even though it's heavily forested, it's a really pretty area. This was the heaviest defense. And so this was a weird thing. The first time I was on this beach, my wife and I took a tour, and the tour was fine. The tour guide was, she didn't really know all that much. She was doing her job. And so we drove back over it, and it was kind of surreal driving on Juno Beach because there's still all these bunkers. And there's one bunker that was a creperie, and it was an old German bunker. And what are you going to do with these massive cement features unless literally blow them up with dynamite? And so it's kind of surreal seeing people frolicking on the beach as there's frolicking on the beach, enjoying themselves at the same time. There's these bunkers right there. And Yeah, it's pretty a fascinating place. At Westerham, that's where that place where they have the very dramatic French commandos in The Longest Day. They would take this, they want to get the exit to Caen. This is where they small little harbor on the Caen Canal. And so those are British forces landing on Sword. That's on Sword, relatively easy. That's Westerham in the background. Yes, he has a bagpipe. I'm going to get Juno, though, was the hardest in the middle. And Gold was another British beach, relatively fast. I'm going to go through these pretty fast. You already saw them in the movie. But let me get to, they also had troops on bikes. And the thought was they could ride their bikes off the beach and get 20 miles in the interior. Needless to say, it was a disaster. Half of the bikes, they lost in the surf. They didn't get off. The men were exhausted. It was like one of those, this is a good idea. Then it turned out not to be. Juno was the hardest. There were buildings there. The Germans had built bunkers right into the buildings. This is near the end of the day, and tide has come up near the sea wall. And so there's literally this sea wall that was constructed in the end to protect to protect the inland from the tides. And this was a nightmare for Canadians. Don't do that to me. Here are Canadians packed into it's called a landing craft tank. And this could hold about, well, you could see about almost a company of men. I don't want to think about that thing would be hit, or a couple tanks. And here they're getting off there with the buildings in the background. And that is a German gun emplacement overlooking Juno Beach. This is after the battle, so it's a Canadian journalist taking this picture. But this would be some of the hardest fighting of the war right here. More Canadians on Juno. And the plan was to advance all the way to this line right here. They did make it to here. Utah Beach. Here's Utah, and the plan was to land here, and they ended up landing right about here. Those are American soldiers on a Higgins boat waiting to go on Utah. Some of you probably already know this, but you see this right here, this vertical stripe? They started putting those on the back of helmets of officers. And this is a little trick they learned. The Germans also did this. And this goes back to wearing different hats, a different style of hats from the 18th century. And the British would have different colored pith helmets, for example, in the 18th century. But they learned real fast in World War I, and then they took it on to World War II. In North Africa, they learned again. The man can't tell who's the officer. So a vertical stripe on the back of the helmet meant that's an officer. A horizontal stripe is a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant. So that's how you can tell the difference in American forces. And they were supposed to land here. They ended up landing here, and that's where Teddy Roosevelt Jr. made the decision just to advance. And I like this one. You can see all the scattered paratroopers. It's a beautiful sandy beach. It's a really pretty place. Utah Beach is pretty amazing. And this is a couple bunkers here you can still go into. Be careful. There might be a bum hiding in there. And that's a couple of the gun emplacements on Utah Beach. But this was not as heavily defended, and they went much further ahead. They eventually went all the way to here. This is not a very good map. This is showing the paratroopers. That's Utah Beach as supplies began to pour in. Here's a picture I took of looking at outside of a bunker, and this is one that I really wish I would not have gone into, because it smelled like a lot of people had used that for a bathroom. We'll leave it at that. But Omaha Beach was the hardest. And Omaha Beach, the one you can see right here, the high cliffs, and it's really kind of surreal. You got these high cliffs and very narrow little passes in between, and this is where the main beaches are, and a couple of those passes where the circles are. You have to go up through these rocky beaches, and there's still all these emplacements up along this beach still there. Some are half blown away, but they're still there. And Point du Hoc, that is where the Rangers would climb those cliffs. Oops, little map I stole, and I don't like it, so. That's Point du Hoc after the battle. No, they will not let you climb out there today. And this is I want to talk a little bit about air power. These are American A-20 bombers, and they're trying to bomb. And I mentioned how they tried to bomb before. Well, the plan was for the invasion, they would heavily shell from naval guns. And so they had mostly World War I era battleships, they called them dreadnoughts back then, shelling also with smaller ships called cruisers and destroyers, but thousands of planes. And there are a couple different ways to bomb them. And the way that was most accurate was to fly parallel to the beach and using the coastline as a place to bomb. But the pilots didn't like that because flying on the beach, if you fly parallel to the beach, it opened up to all the anti-aircraft guns. They want to fly over, either circle around and fly from the landward sided bomb, or from the sea bomb and then get out of the anti-aircraft zone. So you can see this one, they're flying from, so they circle around and they bomb flying back towards England over France. And the problem, you can see in that picture right there. So they would bomb. The problem is they're looking through bomb sights in the nose of these planes trying to figure out where to bomb. And once the first bomb hits, or the first planes, it becomes smoke, and so you can't really see the target anymore, so you bomb the smoke, which makes sense. Smoke must be where the bombs, where the target is. The problem is, if you've ever been on a beach, you ever been on the ocean, you know the wind blows constantly, and it's blowing from the sea over the land. And you can see the smoke drift overland. And what happened is this. They bombed the smoke. Meaning, as the smoke drift overland, they bombed in the interior. And so they bombed French farms, but didn't hit the targets. And so they missed. And so they put all these bombs, and for the most part, they're already inaccurate, but they missed them even more. And you can really see it in that picture. I thought that was a great picture. So I'm not going to do any more Point du Hoc. There's where the bunkers look like. That's the cliffs where they climbed up. You get an idea how sheer it is. The Rangers were cut off for a couple days, and they put this American flag for two reasons: to tell people on the shore, we are Americans up here. But they started dropping supplies in. And here's one of the supply trains, and I thought this was a pretty amazing one. It says ETO's European Theater of Operations, and that's blood. Bringing blood in. And that's Point du Hoc, what it looks like about 10 years ago. Well, here's the main line defenses on the beaches. And remember, they had to land at low tide because of all the beach obstacles. And so the problem was they had, in some spots, almost 500 yards of beach to go. And if they're dropped 80, 90 yards off the shore, and they're carrying 100 pounds of gear, if they don't drown, they're totally exhausted. And then they got to get off the beach. Because all those pink areas, those are bunkers. And most of the guns there, you can see when they show WN-68 and WN-70, they're not sighted out to sea. In fact, they have cement in front of them from the sea, so it's almost impossible to hit them. They're sighted down the beach. And so they have this angle down the beach where it's hard to hit them from shell fire from ships, but anybody going through this little crossfire region, like from WN-70, that little crossfire, they just get mowed down. And they had it shot all the way down the beach. And if they were on the beach, they're just decimated. And so if they're wounded, they're stuck out there in the middle of that right here. These are the roads going off, and they had to get those. So the dramatic scene in The Longest Day where they use that long tube to blow up the barbed wire, that's a Bangalore torpedo. That's right here. That's where it's supposed to be. And that's close to accurate. This long tube, they would push it through and that would blow up the barbed wire. Now, it didn't happen the way they had it in the movie, where they blew the barbed wire and they would go charge with their guns. It was more like they blew it up, and that allowed for small groups to infiltrate up the cliff and outflank the German defenses, because there weren't that many Germans on here. Or here. And let me get a pointer. Oh, no. So Here shows the defenses I talked about before. The seawall, the hedgehogs, mines, Belgian gates. Belgium used that in their defenses in 1940 along the Meuse River that the Germans really did not have much trouble getting around. Those are American forces going towards, that's after Utah, but this is Omaha. You see the high cliffs there. And that's a really good shot of the high cliffs. I don't want to think about these guys. This must be near about midday. And the first wave landed fairly well. It got on the beach. But the second wave was just decimated. And the first wave was stuck on the beach. Bradley's back on board. General Bradley, the overall commander of the American forces. Remember, Montgomery's the overall commander of the invasion. Eisenhower is the overall commander of all Allied forces. Bradley makes the order to send no more reinforcements because the men are getting bunched up on the beach and being slaughtered. Absolutely slaughtered. Here are a couple shots of them and with those hedgehogs trying to get around them. And remember I showed you the picture of those tanks? They're called duplex drive tanks. And they had that kind of canvas around them, and they thought they would land these on the beach. 3/4 of them got waterlogged and sunk, and the 5-man crew, almost all of them died. They couldn't get out of the tank. It was a disaster. That's one of the more famous shots of, these are some men, and those are some medics also. And you can see gear, destroyed Higgins boats that can't move anymore. And that's another one of the more famous shots of a wounded American soldier being dragged ashore. And this is later in the day because the tide's coming in. But you can also see how rocky the beach was, which made it even more difficult. It was all these sandstones, and they're all gone. After the battle, as part of getting supplies in, U.S. engineers with bulldozers bulldozed all the rocks off, and now it's a sandy beach. Nothing at all like it was then. And these are a couple more of the famous shots. Most of the film was lost, unfortunately, and 8 cameramen were either photographers or a couple with 16mm motion picture film would be killed on Omaha Beach. That's against the seawall. A couple of medics working on men. They got to this wall, and that's where they had to get through. And when I kind of explained how they did get through, but eventually small units were able to infiltrate around the barbed wire. They blew up parts of the barbed wire. They got behind the German defenses and took them in the rear, or used satchel charges, which are basically bags of plastic explosives. A new thing called plastic explosives. You get a little duffel bag and pull the fuse and throw it, and it would be a self-contained bomb, or grenades, and they were able to take out one by one these pillboxes. And Bradley was within an hour of pulling the American troops out of Omaha Beach. But when enough of the defenses fell and the American forces got to the cliff heights, he kept it going. Eisenhower even had a letter ready saying that the invasion had failed and he was going to pull them out. And if they would have had to pull the soldiers out of Omaha Beach, D-Day would have been much more difficult because you had the isolated Utah beach and then the 3 British and Canadian beaches separated by this center section, and it would have been very hard to reinforce all the beach to keep one coherent beachhead. It could have put things back, well, even combined, it took them 2 months to get out of Normandy. And if it would have taken even longer, somehow they would have finally pushed out within another month, they would have still been going across France in the middle when it got winter, and it was one of the worst winters in history. Our entire course of history could have been different. They might have still got out of Normandy, but nothing would have stopped the Russian steamroller. They might have taken all of Germany, and who knows where we would be. And so that's how the invasion looked at the end. They expected a pretty straight beachhead all the way through. In fact, there were basically isolated beaches. One German tank division did attack here, but was turned back by a combination of naval guns, and Canadians stopped them. And Where's my map? But the plan was to take not only Carotene and all the way to here, but have from Point du Hoc all the way with Caen and Bayou all the way here on day one. And that was far more than what the soldiers could do. And a lot of people have criticized General Montgomery, and Montgomery has a lot to be criticized about. But he made too ambitious a plan. It still worked very well, despite a number of problems. And by the end of the day, they had secure beachheads. They built a mulberry here and a mulberry here. The remnants are still there. But a horrible storm came in 2 weeks later that destroyed the mulberry here. Actually, most of the beaches would be brought in on LSTs and other ships like that. So that's why I wanted to set out then the breakout. Because the thought was a slow breakout out of here. Well, the Germans sent once the German reinforcements finally came. And by the way, the longest day did do that accurately. Hitler demanded that any order to release the tank divisions he would get personally because he knew better than anyone else. It's amazing how many times countries will get leaders who are not only incompetent, but arrogant about their incompetence, which is a scary combination. But Hitler, they would not wake him up. The plan is for Hitler to get this warning, or to actually make the approval to release those forces. But what happened was he did take sleeping pills. He was on a whole combination of barbiturates and amphetamines, back and forth, back and forth. And they were scared to wake him up because they're all a bunch of toadies and sycophants who really had no idea about the real situation. All they knew is they wanted to stay on Hitler's good side, and so let him sleep for 2 more hours. And so they didn't release him till that night. And so they begin to arrive, and some of the best divisions in the German army begin to arrive, and most of them focused around Caen. And so that is where I'm going to quit. Tomorrow then we're going to watch that, and I'll watch it with you because I want to watch it again. And I'll talk about what parts I want to watch, and I will record it on YouTube. If you want to do another chat on Teams, let me know, and I can do that. Are there any questions? I just wanted to set this up for Normandy. We'll finish up Normandy. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about test. I'm going to have to have some kind of test, but I'll figure it out. And my camera moved. That's why my head is always so tilted. And so I'll do have some kind of test. But the other thing is, we will do Disney. I will watch parts of that because I want to watch it again. It is so well done. And then we'll watch Snow White together. It's pretty big. We go from Omaha Beach to Snow White. But we'll do that, and then we'll do Miss, and then we might do another battle in World War II. I think that would, in fact, I really enjoyed this. And so if that sounds good for everybody, we'll do that. We are for certain going to finish with History of Rock and Roll. And since we're doing it a little bit differently for History of Rock and Roll, I'm just going to tell you that I will do a big one, and I will do probably somebody, this might shock you, but I'll probably do the Beatles. And so I'll do that, and we'll do other ones, but we'll go from there. If there's no questions, please text me if you have any questions. If you have not turned in that worksheet for Battlefield Europe, please get that in. And the longest day, I know you might not have time to watch it, but you can access it on my website. I'll give you a few more days to do that. I know things are all messed up, but please watch it. It's a good movie. And on that note, goodbye.